The town of Everwood was quiet and old, with narrow streets and friendly people who had lived there for generations. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and stories, and where nothing big ever happened. Time moved slowly in Everwood, like a gentle breeze that didn't disturb too much. But in the center of this peaceful town stood something that didn't match the calm life around it, an old, abandoned building that people called the Monument. The Monument was once a grand concert hall, beautiful and impressive, with tall doors, wide steps, and large windows that let in sunlight like a spotlight. Many years ago, it was the town's pride. People came dressed in their best clothes, excited to hear music, watch plays, and celebrate special occasions. Children danced on its stage, and musicians from other towns came to perform. It was a place full of joy, laughter, and culture. But now everything had changed. The hall was silent, broken, and forgotten. Dust covered the wooden floors, spiderwebs stretched across corners, and the windows were cracked like tired eyes. The paint on the walls had faded, and the once bright stage curtain hung like a sad, heavy cloth. The Monument looked like a giant reminder of something that used to matter, but did not matter anymore. People in Everwood walked past it every day, barely noticing it. They had learned to ignore it, the same way people ignore things that make them sad. Some felt pity for it, but most simply accepted that nothing lasts forever. When someone mentioned fixing it, people shrugged and said, "It's too expensive," or "Who has time for that?" In their minds, the hall belonged to the past, not the future. But there was one person in town who saw it differently, a young girl named Lily. She was 12 years old, small and quiet, with a love for music much bigger than her size. She spent hours every day practicing piano, even when no one was watching or listening. Music was her place of comfort, her way of expressing feelings she couldn't put into words. Lily had heard stories about the Monument from her grandmother, who used to sing there when she was young. She told Lily about the bright lights, the cheering crowd, and the magic that filled the hall. Lily listened with wide eyes, imagining herself standing on that stage, playing music that touched people's hearts. Even though she had never seen the hall in its glory, she felt connected to it, as if she belonged to its history without even knowing why. One day, while walking home from school, Lily stopped in front of the building. The giant doors were locked, and the windows were too dirty to see through clearly, but she stood there anyway, staring. She wondered what the hall looked like inside. She wondered if the piano she had heard about was still there. She wondered if it still made sound, or if it had gone completely silent, just like the building itself. Some older kids passed by and laughed at her. "Why are you staring at that old place?" one boy asked. "It's going to be torn down soon, nobody cares about it." Lily didn't answer. She simply kept looking at the building, imagining music echoing through it. But their words stayed in her mind. Torn down? She hadn't known that. She hadn't known that a bulldozer would soon come and erase everything, every story, every memory, every song that had once filled the air. At dinner that night, she asked her grandmother if it was true. Her grandmother sighed sadly and nodded. "The town doesn't have money for repairs. They say it's easier to destroy it than to save it." She paused, looking at Lily. "I don't like it, but that's the way life works sometimes. Old things get replaced." Lily didn't like that answer. She didn't like the idea that something beautiful could just disappear because people stopped caring. She couldn't stop thinking about the hall, about the piano, about the lives that had touched that stage. She wondered how something so important could be treated like trash. The more she thought about it, the more upset she felt. It wasn't fair. The Monument wasn't broken because it was weak. It was broken because it had been abandoned. And maybe, just maybe, it didn't want to be forgotten. Maybe it wanted someone to bring it back to life. The next day, Lily walked past the building again. This time, she noticed things she hadn't seen before: a piece of broken tile, a faded sign, a small engraving on the door that read, "Music lives here." She ran her fingers over the letters, feeling a strange mix of sadness and determination. She didn't know how or why, but she felt like the building was asking for help. She took a step back and imagined it filled with light again. She imagined people sitting in seats, clapping for a performance. She imagined herself playing piano on the stage, her hands trembling with joy. She smiled to herself, even though the vision felt impossible. Most people would have walked away at that point and forgotten the whole thing, but Lily was not like most people. She believed in the power of music, even if no one else did. She believed that something broken could still sing if someone cared enough to try. She didn't want fame, attention, or glory. She didn't want to save a building because she liked old things. She wanted to save it because it mattered, because it had been a part of people's lives, because it held a piece of history, because it deserved more than silence. She took one last look at the hall before walking home. It looked lonely but not hopeless. She didn't know what would happen next, but she made a quiet promise in her heart. She would not forget about the Monument. Even if the whole world walked past it, she would not. And that small promise, made by a young girl with a big heart, was the beginning of a story no one in Everwood expected, least of all her. Lily could not get the monument out of her mind. Every time she walked past it, she imagined what it used to be like when the town loved it and filled it with life. She didn't have memories of those days, but she had heard enough stories to picture them clearly. In her imagination, the hall wasn't dusty or broken. It was shining, full of music, with people laughing and clapping and feeling proud to live in Everwood. She wanted to understand why the hall mattered so much before it became forgotten. So one evening she sat with her grandmother and asked, "What was the monument like when you were young?" Her grandmother's eyes brightened, as if someone had suddenly turned on a light inside her. She leaned back in her chair and smiled at the memory. "It was beautiful, Lily. It wasn't just a building, it was the heart of the town." She explained that many years ago, Everwood didn't feel quiet or sleepy. It was lively. People worked hard, but they also celebrated together. The hall hosted everything: concerts, school plays, weddings, charity events, and holiday festivals. When something important happened, it always happened there. Lily listened with fascination. She imagined children dressed in costumes, nervously waiting backstage. She imagined families sitting in rows of chairs, cheering loudly. She imagined musicians from different places coming to perform, filling the hall with melodies that made people close their eyes and smile. But there was one detail that interested Lily more than anything else: the piano. Her grandmother told her that the monument had a grand piano, a beautiful instrument built by a skilled craftsman long ago. People said its sound was rich, deep, and emotional, like a voice that could make people cry or laugh without saying a single word. Musicians loved it and said it had personality. "It wasn't just a piano," her grandmother said softly. "It was a storyteller." Lily felt a warm flutter in her chest. She loved pianos more than anything, but she had never played one that sounded magical or legendary. She wondered if the piano still existed inside the hall or if it had been thrown away when the building was shut down. Her grandmother shook her head sadly. "It's still in there, locked away, probably broken now." "Why didn't anyone fix it?" Lily asked. Her grandmother sighed. "People got busy, money ran out, the town changed, the building needed repairs, the piano needed maintenance, and slowly everything stopped. One day they closed the doors and that was it." Lily didn't like how simple the explanation was. Something special should not end so quietly. Something important should not be abandoned just because people didn't have enough time or money. It felt unfair. Later that night, Lily went upstairs and sat at her small keyboard. She played a slow, gentle melody, letting the notes fill her room. She imagined what it would sound like if she played on that old grand piano. Would the music feel different? Would it echo through the hall with power? Would it make her feel things she had never felt before? She closed her eyes and pictured herself on the stage. Not in front of a huge audience, but alone, just her and the piano. She imagined the keys smooth beneath her fingers and the room responding to every note. She imagined the building waking up, shaking off dust, remembering what it was made for. The next day, Lily went to the library to learn more about the monument. She searched old newspapers, photos, and articles. Some showed black and white pictures of crowds gathered outside, smiling, holding tickets. Others showed musicians in formal clothes, standing proudly beside the piano. There were even reviews written by people who had traveled from other towns just to hear performances in Everwood. Lily realized the hall had once been famous, not just locally but regionally. People used to say that Everwood was a cultural hub, a place where art and music brought people together. It wasn't a poor, boring town, it was a place full of creativity and talent. The monument wasn't built to be ordinary. It was built as a dream. But everything changed when businesses closed, families moved away, and the town became smaller. Without money or visitors, the monument slowly lost attention. Events stopped, repairs were postponed. People promised they would fix it someday, but someday never came. Eventually, the town decided the building was too expensive to save. It became easier to forget than to fight. Lily felt angry at the idea. She didn't blame anyone specifically, but she hated that something so meaningful could disappear because the world moved too fast for it. When she walked home, she passed the monument again. She noticed its cracked windows, broken steps, and faded walls. But instead of seeing ruin, she imagined ghosts of the past, musicians carrying instruments, children in costumes, people laughing and clapping. She imagined the piano on stage, shining beneath a spotlight, waiting patiently for someone to touch it again. Lily pressed her hand against the cold door and whispered, "I wish I could hear you." She didn't think anyone heard her, but the wind blew softly, as if answering. That night, Lily couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about how history can disappear if no one protects it. She thought about how people forget, but buildings remember. She thought about the piano, silent, lonely, and full of stories that might never be told again. Most people would accept that the monument's time was over, but Lily couldn't. Not because she was confident or brave, but because she cared. Deeply, honestly, stubbornly, she didn't know how to save a building, she didn't know how to fix a piano. She didn't know anything about restoration, money, or organizations. She only knew how to play music. And somehow she believed that music might be enough. And that maybe, just maybe, the monument was waiting for someone exactly like her to bring it back to life, even if she didn't mean to. She didn't want to save a monument, she just wanted to play piano. But sometimes simple desires lead to extraordinary stories. For days, Lily thought about the monument and the piano that was still locked inside. She imagined it sitting in the dark, covered in dust, waiting for someone to wake it up. She didn't plan to save anything. She didn't think she was a hero. She just wanted one thing, to play that piano even if it was only once. One afternoon, as she walked past the building, she saw the caretaker, Mr. Hayes, unlocking the side door. He was an older man with a tired face and slow steps. He had worked there for many years before the hall shut down. He was one of the few people who still entered the building, mostly to check for damage or make sure no one snuck inside. Lily felt her heart race. She was scared to talk to him, but the chance felt too important to miss. She stood there for a moment, hesitating before finally gathering courage and walking toward him. "Excuse me," she said softly. Mr. Hayes looked up, surprised to see a child standing in front of him. "Yes." Lily swallowed nervously. "I heard there's a piano inside. Can I play it just once?" For a second, the old man simply stared at her as if her request didn't make any sense. Then he chuckled, not meanly but in disbelief. "Play it. Nobody has played that thing in years. It's practically falling apart." "I don't care," Lily said quietly. "I just want to try." Mr. Hayes wiped his hands on his jacket, shaking his head. "Why would you want to play a broken piano in a broken building? There are better places, you know." Lily didn't have a good answer. She didn't know how to explain the feeling she had when she thought of the hall. She didn't know how to tell him that she felt connected to a time she never lived in. So she simply said, "Because I love music." Something in her voice made the caretaker pause. He didn't see a silly child asking for a weird favor, he saw someone who cared. And maybe a part of him missed the music too, he shrugged. "Fine, but only for a few minutes and you don't touch anything else." Lily's face lit up. "Thank you." He opened the door and she stepped inside. The smell of dust and old wood hit her immediately. The hallway was dark except for a few sunbeams sneaking through broken windows. Each step echoed, making the silence feel louder. Mr. Hayes led her into the main hall. When she reached the stage, she stopped walking. She felt as if she had entered a dream. The room was huge, with rows of empty seats stretching into the darkness. The stage was wide, and in the center stood the piano, silent, dusty, and majestic, even in its damaged state. Its lid was closed, its black paint chipped, but it still carried a dignity that time couldn't erase. Lily walked toward it slowly, as if approaching something sacred. She slid her fingers across the instrument's surface. The wood was cold and rough. She lifted the lid carefully, revealing the yellowed keys. "Be gentle," the caretaker warned. "It's fragile." Lily nodded. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment she didn't play, she just listened to the silence around her. It was heavy and sad, as if the hall had forgotten what sound felt like. Then she pressed a key. The note was weak, soft, and slightly out of tune, but it was alive. She pressed another key, then a third. The music didn't sound perfect, but it carried a voice that had been trapped for years. Lily began to play a simple melody she knew by heart. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully, respecting the instrument. The caretaker leaned against the wall, watching with a thoughtful expression. He had always believed the piano was finished, too damaged to matter. But listening now, he realized that even broken things could still make something beautiful. As she played, dust floated in the air, dancing in the sunlight like tiny sparks. The sound filled the room, bouncing off the walls and traveling into every corner. For the first time in years, the monument was not quiet. It was breathing. Outside, a couple walking past stopped when they heard the faint music. The melody drifted through cracks in the walls, delicate but haunting. They stood still, listening, surprised and curious. Inside, Lily kept playing. She wasn't thinking about the future or saving buildings or impressing anyone. She was just playing because music was her language, her comfort. But something unusual happened. The more she played, the more alive everything felt. The hall, the piano, even the caretaker seemed to wake up. Suddenly a key stuck, making a loud, ugly thump. Lily winced and stopped. She looked embarrassed. "Sorry," she whispered, as if she had hurt the piano's feelings. The caretaker shook his head. "Don't apologize, it's old, not angry." What? Lily smiled weakly. "Still, it deserves better." The caretaker studied her for a moment. He had spent years watching the hall decay, feeling helpless. But hearing Lily say that made him feel something small but hopeful. Maybe the place wasn't dead, maybe it just needed someone to care again. After a few minutes, Lily stood up reluctantly. "Thank you for letting me play." Mr. Hayes nodded. "You're welcome. It was nice to hear music again." What? As she walked toward the exit, she looked back one last time. The piano sat quietly, as if waiting for more. The hall didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt like it had a soul, and she had touched it. Lily left with no plan, no mission, no idea of the storm her simple moment would start. She believed she had done something tiny, just play a few notes. But she didn't know that someone outside had recorded the sound. She didn't know that people would talk about it. She didn't know that a forgotten building had just been given a voice again. All she wanted to do was play piano, but she had accidentally awakened a monument. The next morning, people in Everwood woke up to something unusual. On social media, there was a short video with the caption, "Someone played the old piano today, the monument is still alive." The video was shaky, recorded from outside through a window crack, but the sound was clear enough to catch attention. It showed a young girl inside the abandoned hall, playing a slow, emotional melody on a dusty piano. Most people didn't know who she was, but they recognized the building instantly. Some laughed and said, "Who on earth is playing in that wreck?" Others felt surprised, even touched, because the old hall they had forgotten suddenly had a heartbeat again. By the time Lily got to school, students were already talking about it. "Did you see that video? Someone snuck into the monument. I didn't know the piano was still there." Lily didn't say anything. She didn't want attention. She didn't even know someone had recorded her. She just listened quietly, feeling a strange mix of embarrassment and excitement. She had only wanted to experience the piano for herself. She never imagined anyone else would care. Meanwhile, the monument stood silent again, but it felt different. The dust was still there, the walls still cracked, but the music from the day before seemed to linger in the air as if refusing to fade away. Later that afternoon, Mr. Hayes, the caretaker, sat on the stage staring at the piano. He had spent years entering the hall without feeling anything, no excitement, no hope, nothing but responsibility. But yesterday had changed something. Hearing music inside that old building had made him feel young, even alive for a moment. He gently opened the piano lid and touched the keys. They were rough, some loose, some sticky, but he realized it still had voice, even if damaged. He whispered half to himself, "Maybe you're not finished yet." Others who saw the video started to recall memories. An old woman commented, "That's where I got married." A man replied, "I proposed to my wife on that stage." Another person wrote, "I used to play violin there every winter." People didn't just react to the music, they reacted to what it reminded them of. The monument wasn't just wood and bricks, it held pieces of their lives. And Lily's unexpected performance had stirred those memories awake. One person who saw the video was Sophie Clark, a local journalist who worked for the town newspaper. She was younger than most reporters, energetic, curious, and always searching for stories that mattered, even in a small town. When she heard the shaky recording, she stopped scrolling. She listened again, and again. Something in the music pulled her in, something raw, honest, and emotional. She didn't know who played, but she knew it wasn't an accident. Someone had chosen that place, that piano, that moment. Someone who still believed in it. Sophie walked to the monument that afternoon, hoping to speak with whoever had been inside. She found Mr. Hayes sweeping near the entrance. "Excuse me," she said, "I'm looking for a girl who played piano here yesterday." Mr. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I want to write a story," Sophie replied. "People should know this place isn't dead." The caretaker sighed. She didn't come to save anything, she just wanted to play. Sophie smiled. Maybe that's exactly the kind of story people need. She peeked inside, amazed at how large and sad the hall looked. Yet in some strange way she could still feel the music. She imagined the piano keys shaking off dust, the sound filling the air like sunlight. That night, Sophie published an article with the headline, "The Monument That Still Has a Voice." She didn't mention Lily's name, she didn't know it, but she described the music, the history, and the building's silent plea for a second chance. She wrote about the forgotten concerts, the weddings, the plays, and the laughter that once lived there. She wrote about the piano with a cracked heart that still beat. She didn't write like a journalist. She wrote like someone telling a story around a fire, hoping anyone would care enough to listen. The article spread faster than anyone expected. People shared it, commented on it, argued about it. Some said, "It's just a building." Others said, "No, it's our history." Even those who pretended not to care found themselves reading every sentence. Lily saw the article by accident. She read it slowly, tears forming in her eyes. She didn't know who wrote it, but she felt seen, understood by a stranger. She hadn't meant to start anything, but somehow her simple act had echoed outward, touching hearts she didn't even know. Her grandmother read the article too, sighed, and said softly, "That place still matters, I knew it." The next day, people who had never set foot in the hall for years walked past it with different eyes. Some stopped to stare, others whispered memories to their children. A few even pressed their palms against the old door, as if apologizing. Inside, the piano sat quietly, unaware of the stir it had caused. It didn't know about articles or social media. It only knew that someone had touched it gently and lovingly and awakened something inside it. Mr. Hayes stood near the doorway, watching people gather. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a guard of a dying building. He felt like a keeper of a sleeping treasure. And all of this began not because someone set out to save a monument, but because a young girl just wanted to play piano. She had lit a spark without meaning to, and now something long forgotten had begun to glow. The article about the monument did more than surprise people. It created a gentle wave of curiosity that spread through Everwood. People who hadn't thought about the hall in years suddenly began to remember birthdays, first dances, concerts, and moments they thought were lost forever. They didn't know who played the piano, but they all seemed to feel something important. The monument wasn't dead yet. Lily never expected anything like this. She wanted to keep her visit a secret, but the moment she heard people talking about the mysterious pianist, she knew it was because of her. Some classmates joked about her being the ghost of the monument, while others tried to guess who the musician was. Lily listened but kept silent. She didn't want attention, she didn't want fame, she wasn't trying to be a hero. She simply wanted the piano to feel alive again, even for a moment. Meanwhile, Sophie, the journalist, continued to work on a follow-up story. She wanted to talk to people who remembered the building. She interviewed an elderly couple who had danced at their wedding reception there. She spoke to a retired teacher who used to coordinate school plays. She even found an old violinist who cried while describing the hall's final concert before it closed. With every story she collected, the monument began to sound more like a living character than a building. It wasn't just old, it was lonely. Sophie wasn't alone in her effort. Several townspeople started leaving comments online. "We should fix it. We can't let them tear it down. I'd volunteer if others helped." The caretaker, Mr. Hayes, saw all of this with quiet amazement. He had spent years watching people ignore the building, but suddenly everyone cared. He didn't know if they could save the hall, but he knew one thing: someone had finally reminded the town of what it once was. One afternoon, Sophie visited Mr. Hayes again to ask more questions. The two sat on the steps outside the hall watching cars drive by. "Do you think this place has a chance?" Sophie asked. The caretaker shrugged. "Hope is easy, work is harder." "But you believe something can be done, right?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I believe it deserves a chance." He told her that the town council had already planned to demolish the building in a few months. The repairs were too expensive, and no one had shown interest until now. Sophie felt a shock run through her. She thought they had more time. "What if people got organized?" she asked. "What if we fundraised, held events?" Mr. Hayes gave a tired smile. "If someone had started 10 years ago maybe, but now. The structure is weak, the roof leaks. The repairs cost more than anyone here can afford." Sophie didn't like the answer, but she understood it. Saving the monument wouldn't be romantic and dramatic. It would be slow, messy, expensive, and difficult. And nobody in town was rich enough to make it happen alone. But she also knew that sometimes hope began with a story. Maybe her words could reach someone outside Everwood, someone who believed in history, culture, and art. That evening, she published another article, this time more urgent. She explained the building's condition and its scheduled demolition. She wrote that a young pianist had reminded the town of what it had lost, and what it could still save. She asked people to share the story, donate if they could, and talk about the monument before it disappeared forever. The article spread beyond Everwood, reaching people in nearby towns. A few artists, musicians, and history lovers shared it, saying things like, "Places like this shouldn't vanish." A small donation page began receiving money, nothing huge, but enough to feel real. $20 here, $50 there, sometimes just $5. People didn't give because they believed they could fully save the hall. They gave because they wanted to be part of a fight that sounded meaningful. Meanwhile, Lily continued her normal life. She practiced piano at home, did homework, played with friends, but her heart stayed tied to the monument. She walked past it every day after school, watching the door, hoping to feel that moment again, the moment music filled the empty space. One Saturday, she saw a small group of people standing outside taking photos. She heard one woman say, "My grandmother used to dance here." Another person said, "I wish they would." "My grandmother used to dance here." Another person said, "I wish they would." "Open it one last time." They didn't know Lily was the reason they were there, and she didn't want them to know. She simply listened, feeling a quiet pride and sadness inside her. The caretaker stepped outside to talk to them. He looked overwhelmed, not annoyed, but amazed. After years of silence, people were suddenly showing up, asking questions, remembering, caring. Lily wondered if she should say something to him, maybe ask if she could play again. But she didn't. She felt shy, like she had already used up her courage. What she didn't know was that Mr. Hayes thought of her often. He thought of how she made the hall come alive for a few minutes. He thought of how her simple act turned into articles, videos, donations, and conversations. He understood something that Lily didn't understand yet. Without meaning to, she had started a movement. She hadn't stood on a stage with speeches or banners. She hadn't told people to save anything. She just sat down at a lonely piano and played. And somehow that was enough to wake up a town. No one knew if they could save the monument. The money was small, the time was short, and the building was damaged, but something powerful had started. People were trying. For the first time in years, the question wasn't, why bother? It was, what if we can? Weeks passed, and the future of the monument grew more uncertain. The town council had officially confirmed a date for demolition. There were fewer than 30 days left before machines would arrive and pull down the old building once and for all. Posters announcing the demolition were pinned to boards in shops, cafes, and streets, like an invitation to a funeral nobody wanted to attend. People sighed when they saw the notices. Some shook their heads. Some said, we tried, even though they hadn't really tried at all. Donations had slowed down. The excitement from the articles had faded, replaced by quiet worry. The total amount collected was not even close to what was needed. Sophie, the journalist, felt the weight of failure creeping in. She had told the story with passion, collected memories, published updates, and encouraged everyone she could, but even she wondered if her hope had been foolish. She stared at her computer late at night, scrolling through donation numbers that moved too slowly, like time dripping from a broken faucet. Meanwhile, Lily lived her life like any other schoolgirl, but she couldn't forget the piano. She thought about it every day. She thought about the heavy silence of the hall before she played, and how the sound had echoed like a heartbeat afterward. She didn't understand the financial situation, or construction, or restoration. She only understood music. One afternoon after school, she passed the monument and found Mr. Hayes standing outside, staring at the demolition notice on the door. His shoulders looked heavy. Is it really going to happen? Lily asked quietly. He nodded, unless someone finds a miracle. Lily looked down. She didn't know how to find miracles. The caretaker studied her for a moment. People don't save buildings with feelings, they save them with money and work. And we don't have enough of either. He didn't say it angrily, just honestly. Lily nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She didn't want to save a building. She wanted to play. She wanted music. Then a wild idea appeared in her mind, simple but stubborn, an idea that came from the only place she knew, her heart. Can I play the piano again? She asked. Mr. Hayes blinked. Why? Lily shrugged. Because it's still here. He stared at her for a moment. Then, surprisingly, he unlocked the door and let her in. The hall was colder than before, and dust covered everything again, as if time wanted to erase what had happened weeks ago. But when Lily sat at the piano, she felt calm, like the world made sense again. She played a slow, sad song, a song that sounded like goodbye. What neither of them knew was that a woman across the street heard the music. She was closing her shop for the night when the notes floated through the air like a memory. She walked over, stood outside, and listened. And she wasn't the only one. A teenager on a bike stopped. An elderly man with a cane paused mid-step. A mother pushing a stroller stood still, letting her child listen. Within minutes, a small group gathered outside, not speaking, just listening through cracks in the old doors. Inside, Lily played with all the emotion she didn't know how to express with words: fear, sadness, love, confusion. She didn't know people were listening. She didn't know strangers outside were wiping away tears. She didn't know that sound had power even without intention. When she finished, applause burst from outside, surprising her. She jumped, slightly shocked. Mr. Hayes smiled weakly. Looks like you had an audience. What? She peeked outside and saw faces filled with gratitude, not pity. Someone shouted, play another. Someone else said, let her in the building every day. People laughed, not cruelly but joyfully. Lily's cheeks turned red. She wasn't used to attention. She sat back down and played something lighter, happier, brighter. The building felt alive again. The piano wasn't perfect, but its imperfections made it emotional, human. Word spread quickly that night. Social media filled with short clips captioned, "The monument still sings. She's back. This place cannot be destroyed." People commented things like, "I forgot how much I loved this building. We can't lose it now." Music brought it back, let's save it. More donations came in, small amounts but steady. $10, $15, sometimes even $100. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to show that people still cared. The next morning, Sophie woke up to dozens of notifications. She saw the new videos, the comments, the excitement. She felt her heart race with fresh hope. She rushed to the monument and found Mr. Hayes unlocking the door again. "You need to let her play publicly," Sophie said breathlessly. "People want to hear it, they want to feel connected, they want something to fight for." He frowned, unsure. "She's just a kid, what if she doesn't want that attention?" Sophie nodded. "Then don't force her, ask her." They waited for Lily to arrive after school. When she did, Sophie explained carefully, "People want to hear you, they want to come inside, they want to remember." Lily's eyes widened. She wasn't confident. She wasn't trained for performance. She didn't want a crowd staring at her. "I just wanted to play," she whispered. Sophie smiled softly. "I know, but sometimes what we do without meaning to becomes important to others." Lily looked at the piano, then at the old hall. She didn't feel ready, but she didn't feel like saying no either. Not because she wanted fame, but because she had seen what music could do. She nodded, shy but sincere. I'll play. And suddenly a new plan was born, not from strategy, not from big speeches, but from a child's simple willingness. They would hold a performance, not fancy, not professional, just real. A night when the monument would speak one more time before anyone tried to silence it forever. Maybe it wouldn't save the building, but it might save the story, and that was worth trying. The night of the performance arrived much faster than anyone expected. It wasn't a big, fancy event with posters, tickets, or decorations. It was planned in less than a week, spread mostly by word of mouth, social media shares, and the curiosity of people who felt something happening in Everwood, something they didn't completely understand but didn't want to miss. By sunset, people began gathering outside the monument. The old hall, which had been ignored for years, now had a small crowd waiting at its doors. Parents held their children's hands, teenagers stood in groups, and elderly couples leaned on canes but refused to miss it. Some came because they loved music, some came because they remembered the past, some came simply because they sensed that this was one of those nights they would talk about years later. Inside, the hall had been cleaned as much as possible. Volunteers swept floors, rearranged chairs, and dusted the piano. They didn't try to hide the cracks or broken tiles. They didn't have the time or money. Instead, they embraced them. The imperfections made the moment honest. Lily sat on the stage alone, staring at the piano. Her hands felt cold and shaky, and her heart beat hard enough to hear. She kept thinking, I didn't ask for this. She didn't want fame or attention. She didn't want pressure. She had never performed in front of more than her family and a few classmates. Mr. Hayes sat beside her and said quietly, you don't have to be perfect. Just play like you played before, like the building matters. Lily nodded. She didn't speak because her voice might crack. Sophie stood near the entrance with her notebook, watching people arrive. She hadn't organized a large community movement before. She hadn't saved anything in her career, only written stories about things that were already happening. But today felt different. Today she wasn't just writing history, she was part of it. As more people filled the hall, there was a strange feeling in the air, a mix of sadness and hope, as if everyone understood that this might be the last time they would stand inside the monument before it disappeared forever. The mayor of Everwood even showed up, quietly slipping into a seat in the back row. He didn't come to give speeches. He came to listen, to see with his own eyes whether this place was really worth saving. When the chairs were full and people still stood in aisles, Mr. Hayes dimmed the lights. The chatter faded into silence. Lily stepped forward, her small figure swallowed by the size of the stage. She sat down on the bench and placed her fingers gently on the keys. For a second she froze. She remembered all the reasons she was afraid, her age, her lack of experience, the cracks in the piano, the fear of disappointing people who had finally started caring. Then she remembered the real reason she was here, because she loved music. She pressed the first key. The note was soft, fragile, and imperfect, but it echoed with life. She played slowly at first, then with growing confidence. The piano responded not flawlessly but truthfully. People sat in complete silence, listening as if every sound mattered. The music wasn't professional or polished. There were mistakes, uneven notes, and tiny pauses when her fingers hesitated. But somehow those imperfections made the performance more emotional. It sounded like hope fighting against fear, like a memory trying not to fade. Some people closed their eyes, others leaned forward, some wiped away tears quietly. A child rested their head on their mother's shoulder and listened peacefully. When Lily finished the first song, no one clapped, not because they didn't like it, but because they were too moved. They didn't want to break the spell. Then slowly, applause began, soft at first, then louder, warmer, stronger. Lily looked shocked, almost embarrassed, but she smiled, a shy smile that lit up the whole stage. She played again, this time a brighter, playful song. The hall felt lighter, people smiled, someone laughed softly. The building felt alive, as if shaking off years of dust, remembering its purpose. Between songs, Sophie whispered to the mayor, there are hundreds of people here. The mayor nodded slowly. I never imagined this. At the end of the performance, Lily played a final piece, one she had practiced at home late at night. It was emotional, filled with longing and tenderness. It didn't ask for attention, it asked for understanding. As she played the last note, the piano's sound faded into silence like a sigh. The entire hall stood. People clapped, cheered, cried, and hugged. Some shouted, save it. Others said, we can't let this go. Old men who once danced there wiped their eyes. Teenagers who never cared about history shouted encouragement. Parents lifted their kids onto their shoulders so they could see. The mayor walked onto the stage, clearing his throat. I cannot promise anything tonight, he began, but I see something I did not see before. He looked at Lily. I see a place worth saving. The crowd erupted again. Mr. Hayes felt tears in his eyes. He hadn't seen this hall alive in decades. He hadn't heard applause in so long, he almost forgot what it sounded like. Sophie looked around and whispered to herself, "This is not just a performance. This is a turning point." Lily sat on the bench, stunned. She hadn't meant to change anything. She had simply played piano, but something extraordinary had happened. People didn't just hear her music, they felt it. They remembered, they believed. And the monument, once silent and forgotten, had found its voice again, not because someone planned a movement, but because a child played with heart. That night the hall was still old, still damaged, still facing demolition. But it wasn't alone anymore. And everyone who walked away carried the same thought: maybe a miracle wasn't impossible after all. The morning after the performance, everyone felt different. People woke up talking about what they had seen, what they had felt, and what they never expected to experience inside a broken building. Photos from the event appeared online, showing a small girl at a dusty piano, sitting in a place that should have been silent but wasn't anymore. Comments filled the posts. "I can't believe how emotional it was. The monument must be saved. This town is alive again." For the first time in years, Everwood buzzed with conversation. Not gossip, not complaints, but hope. Lily, however, did not wake up feeling like a hero. She woke up tired, a little embarrassed, and confused about how her simple playing had created so much noise. She sat at the kitchen table eating cereal while her grandmother smiled over a cup of tea. "You were wonderful," her grandmother said. "I made mistakes," Lily replied, cheeks burning. "Everyone makes mistakes," her grandmother answered gently, "but very few people have the courage to play anyway." Later that day, Lily walked to the monument with shaking legs. She wasn't sure why she went, maybe because she needed to see it again, or maybe because part of her feared it would still feel sad. But when she arrived, she found something surprising: people working. Volunteers swept, hammered loose planks, painted small patches on the walls, and cleared debris. They didn't have a plan or permission from anyone official. They simply started doing what they could. A teenager Lily recognized from school looked up and said, "Hey, you're the girl from last night, right?" Lily's face turned red. "I guess. You did something crazy," he said, shaking his head. "You made this place matter again." She didn't know how to respond. She just smiled awkwardly and walked inside. The town council held an emergency meeting that afternoon. The mayor, who had listened to the music and seen the crowd, stood in front of everyone looking thoughtful, not tired like he usually did. "We cannot ignore what happened last night," he said. "This building is broken, it is old. It will cost more than any of us can afford to fix, but it is loved." Someone in the room clapped, others nodded. A council member reminded him, "We still don't have enough money. Love cannot fix walls or roofs." "That is true," the mayor admitted, "but maybe we can find help beyond our borders." He suggested contacting cultural foundations, music organizations, historic preservation groups, even sponsors from other cities. He proposed writing proposals, collecting photos, and sending videos from the performance. He wasn't promising success, but he was finally willing to try. The vote changed that afternoon. Instead of demolition, the project became under review. The countdown stopped. Machines would not arrive, not yet. When the news spread, the town cheered as if they had won a battle. It wasn't a full victory, but it was a chance, a precious, fragile chance. Sophie, the journalist, cried when she heard the announcement. She rushed to her computer, typing articles with her fingers moving so fast they blurred. She emailed newspapers, magazines, bloggers, anyone she thought might listen. Her headline was simple: "A child's music stopped a demolition. Can a town save what she started?" The article spread beyond Everwood. People in other towns read it, commented, shared it. Some called it beautiful, others called it unbelievable. A few even donated money. Meanwhile, Lily continued practicing piano at home, but she avoided crowds. She didn't want praise, she didn't want cameras, she didn't want attention. She only wanted the monument to live. One afternoon, Mr. Hayes invited her back to the hall. The piano sat uncovered, cleaned, and polished with care. Its cracks were still visible, but its surface gleamed slightly in the sunlight. "It looks better," Lily said, touching the keys softly. "So do you," he replied with a smile. She sat down and played, not for an audience, not to save anything, but because music was hers. And as she played, she realized something. She didn't just love music, she needed it. And somehow the monument needed it too. Weeks passed and slowly things changed. Donations increased. Letters arrived from strangers offering support. A foundation from another city sent inspectors to evaluate restoration costs. A local musician offered to host a benefit concert. A construction company agreed to do some work for free. No single act saved the monument, but together many small acts built something strong. One evening, Lily stood in the hall as volunteers worked around her. She watched people paint walls, replace boards, and fix lights. She felt amazed, not at herself, but at what everyone had done. "How did this happen?" she whispered. Mr. Hayes, wiping sweat from his forehead, said, "Someone reminded us why it mattered." Lily shook her head. "I didn't mean to." "That's the best part," he said. "The greatest changes often start by accident." Months later, the monument reopened officially, not finished, not perfect, but alive. Families filled the seats, musicians played, children laughed, and the building echoed with life again. The mayor gave a speech thanking everyone, but especially one girl. He pointed to Lily and said, "She didn't lead a movement, she didn't have a plan, she just played piano, and that was enough to wake us up." People clapped, but Lily looked down, shy and small, just the way she always had. Later that night, she sat alone on the stage, playing softly. The piano sounded fuller, richer, healthier, as if it had been waiting for this moment all its life. She smiled, whispering, "You're safe now." The monument didn't answer, but the music did. Lily didn't save a building on purpose. She just played piano. And in doing so, she accidentally saved a monument by reminding people of the beauty they had forgotten and the history they almost let die.